Welcome to this election special here on A New Life in France. Last Thursday the UK voted, and on Sunday the French had their second round of elections, so we know the result in both countries. So what we want to bring to you today is we're going to talk to three experts. I'm going to ask them a little bit more what the impact is of the UK elections and the French elections for expats who are looking to move to France or already living here in France. Let's go to our first expert. We are going to talk to Tim Williams. Tim is from Beauvillage. He's going to share with us his experience and his expertise, and I'm going to ask him some real key questions. Tim, thank you for joining us here today on A New Life in France. Really excited to have you here on this election special. Why don't I just dive straight in? Tim, what do you think is going to be the impact of both the UK and the French elections here in France in the housing market?
Well, that's a good question. Thanks, Phil. Just a bit of background first. What we traditionally see in the marketplace regarding Brits buying in France is every time there's an election, a British election or a French election, there's always a slight hesitation, a pause in the market just before the election, during the election, and for a little while after the election. And I think the reason for that simply is because people like to buy in an environment of a degree of certainty. And whilst elections are taking place, there is obviously uncertainty. As far as these two recent elections go, I think it's fair to say there was not much uncertainty regarding the UK election, but huge uncertainty regarding the French election. So we'll come on to those perhaps in turn. Regarding the UK election, it was always clear that the vote was going to be an anti-Tory vote. And I think what's the outcome of the election, whilst predictable, it's not entirely clear what's going to be happening in terms of economic competence in the UK. There are good signs being given by Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer. I note with interest that Rachel Reeves is the first economist to be Chancellor of the Exchequer for about 70 years. Not only she's the first female Chancellor of the Exchequer ever, but the first economist for a very long time. So that probably augurs well, I hope. What British buyers looking to buy in France are looking for is some kind of certainty, some kind of background of stability. And I think that's been lost over the last several months and years under the Tories. We saw what happened when Liz Truss made her appearance on the scene. And the answer to that is that it's the market that makes the judgment. And the finance markets, the exchange rate markets, and the bonds markets gave a very swift and corrective answer to Liz Truss, which caused her demise. So I think Labour are aware of that. I think they will aim for stability. They're not going to try and fix things in the short term. They're going to try and put the building blocks in place for a more secure future. So that augurs well. The ability of a UK government to influence matters fiscally is challenged at the moment, both in the UK and in France, and in fact across the world, because of the amount of debt that governments have. In the UK, the UK debt has just exceeded 100% of GDP. That's just a measure. It's not as high as it is in America, and it's not as high as it is in other European countries. Italy, for example, 150%. And France is 110%. What that means is that as interest rates go up, so the government has to spend more money on its debt interest. And that constrains what it can do in terms of other fiscal policy. So that given, there are constraints about what the British government can do in terms of providing stability. The other huge factor is interest rates, of course. And many years ago, when I came to France, the interest rates were 160 to the pound, 160 euros to the pound. And this morning they're 118. And that's good because a year ago they were about 111. And so over a period of about a year, we've seen an approximate change, improvement from the point of view of a British buyer of about 7%. So you may say, well, that's not very much, a move from 111 euros to 118 euros. But in actual fact, if you turn that into euros buying a house, on a 300,000 euro house, that amounts to about a 16,000 pound saving for the same property that was on the market a year ago. So if you look at it in those terms, it's quite encouraging for British buyers in France. And the second reason why it's encouraging is that prices in France have not been increasing at the same rate as they have been in the UK. We've had a very weak domestic French property market for the last 18 months or 2 years. In fact, the weakest 2 consecutive years of French property market for 50 years. We saw the market contract 20%, and then just under 20% in 2023. Those are huge contractions, and so the market has been a little bit weaker, but it's cyclical. It will come back, and I think from the perspective of the British buyer, it's a good time to be buying in France. Their pound goes a bit further, and the market is just waiting to pick up again. So that's a look at the impact from the UK elections and more generally about economic factors. The issue with the French election is a bit different. We were, not I say we, many people were nervous as a result of the first round of elections last Sunday, that the far right were going to get into power. That has not proven to be the case. We have a different type of problem from that, which is indecision. We don't have a majority government, and the French Fifth Republic has never had a situation where it hasn't had a single party in government before. It's never dealt with coalitions. Other European electoral systems allow for coalitions. So the German system, the Dutch system, the Italian system, but the Fifth Republic in France has never had a coalition. It's had collaboration where a French president has been of one particular political color and parliament been another, but it's never had a situation where in parliament it's not had a majority. So we're facing, we're on new territory as far as the French situation is concerned. From a macroeconomic point of view, had we had far-right government in France, then we were looking at potential problems in relations with the EU. And they'd already said that they are looking for a rebate from the EU, rather like Maggie Thatcher did back in the 80s. They rode back on their original policy aim, which was to withdraw France, a Frexit, if you like. They've rode back from that, but they are still anti-EU and anti-Euro. The risk then with a right government would have been arguments with the EU and weakness in the Euro. We don't have that. What we have is a left-leaning parliament, which looks like some kind of collaboration between the two central, or the central group and the left-wing group. And that brings with it a different type of challenge, because the Mélenchon, the head of the left-wing group, has made some extravagant promises to the electorate. For example, reducing the retirement age from a newly won 64, which Macron achieved, back down to 60. That's one thing. The second thing that they promised to do is to increase the minimum wage by 14%, when inflation in Europe now is under 3%. So that's the second thing. And the third thing they're promising to do is price controls. And that is to say to retailers, you are simply not allowed to put the prices up of essential goods. Now, any economic historian will tell you that price controls don't work. They are a catastrophic failure. When you increase minimum rates of pay, that increases unemployment. That's a sort of a historical economic norm. And so I think what we're going to be faced with is a different type of challenge in economic terms. I've already mentioned that the French debt to GDP ratio is 110%. France's government is already at odds with the EU because its budget deficit is 5% per year against GDP, and the limit imposed by the EU is 3%. So they're breaking those rules. So what I think we might see if we have a left-leaning coalition is difficult fiscal policy decisions. And for those different reasons, I think we might see weakness in the euro. And that's a rather circuitous discussion. But what it brings it back to is, from the point of view of a British buyer, a weak euro is a good idea, is a good thing. So as I mentioned before, the exchange rate's gone from 111 to 118. That's good for British buyers. If it goes to 125, well, that could be even better. So potentially, I mean, a lot of things have to be decided. We haven't got a prime minister yet. There's a lot of horse trading got to take place. But potentially we could see a further weakening of the euro. And I noticed that the euro is weaker this morning than it was on Friday. So that might be the trend. And that is a good thing for British buyers.
And Tim, for my second question, do you think then that these two elections will actually kickstart the housing market here in France?
Do I think the election results will kickstart the property market? Indirectly, I do, but not directly. Why do I say that? Because unless legislation is brought in to reduce the cost of mortgages, which is a key factor in France, then those things have to happen indirectly. And the way they happen indirectly is through interest rates. Interest rates zoomed up as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine a couple of years ago. We saw prices going up. We saw inflation peak at just under 10% in France and in Europe. And so interest rates zoomed up. The corollary of that is, of course, mortgage rates went up, and the number of mortgages lent last year absolutely collapsed. That's going to improve as inflation starts coming down, and it has started coming down. Inflation in Europe is now under 3%. In France, it's under 3%. The ECB was the first of the central banks to begin to trim its interest rates, which it did in June. The Bank of England is expected to follow suit, but it was pausing for the election. I think a political decision, sensibly enough. But I think as we see stability beginning to come back to the UK, and we continue to see inflation in the UK down at the 2.5% level, then the bank won't have much choice but to reduce interest rates. So reducing interest rates then has the knock-on effect of reducing mortgage rates. Once money becomes more available, then that frees up the market. And the background to all this is that markets are cyclical. You don't see long periods of decline or long periods of booming growth. What you see is fluctuations in a general trend, and the general trend is upwards. But we've had 2 years of downturn within a cycle, and I expect 2024 to be the leveling out, the bottoming of that. And as we go forwards into 2025, starting in the autumn, beginning to start in the autumn of 2024, I think the French property market will start to improve. And prices will start to recover.
Thank you again, Tim, for joining us. It's been great for you to give that insight. We're now joined by our second guest. We are joined by David Newsom from Smart Currency Exchange, based in the UK, and I'm really interested to see what David has to say on how the currency market has and will continue to react to the two elections. David, thank you for joining us today. It's great to have you here. I'm really interested and intrigued to look at how both the UK and the French elections have actually had an impact on the currency markets for those expats looking to move to France or already living here in France.
Hi, yes. So one of the main impacts that politics and elections have on people moving to France is the effect that they have on exchange rates. Fluctuating exchange rates perhaps are not the first thing people think about when purchasing a property in France, whether it's a holiday home or an actual move. But politics and the elections create uncertainty in the markets and cause exchange rates to be volatile. Currency markets are powered by large financial institutions buying and selling huge amounts of currency. They want good governance. It's all about political stability and the impact of that on the economy. So we've seen Labour secure a majority in the UK general election, which was predicted, and you can argue that this was already priced into the market way ahead of last Friday. France is going to have a hung parliament. What happens now is critical not just for France, but for the future of the European Union. So again, plenty of volatility in the currency markets. We also have US elections to consider, which are around 4 months away. The economy, politics, and elections cause exchange rates to be volatile. We know that. The point here is moving exchange rates hugely impact a client's budget. The sterling cost of the euro property they are purchasing. When buying in France, there's roughly 3 months between signing the initial contracts, the compromis, when you're agreeing to buy the property, and completion, when you have to pay the euro balance. When signing the paperwork and agreeing to buy, you agree a euro number, the euro cost of that property that you will pay to the notaire in France on completion in 3 or 4 months' time, for example. Fluctuating exchange rates can dramatically impact the sterling cost of that property. The euro figure stays the same, but the sterling cost moves up and down with the exchange rates. Essentially, you don't know how much that property in France will cost you once you get to completion if you do not manage your currency exposure. We call this currency risk. You could find yourself in a position where that property is costing you more in sterling, perhaps even more than you budgeted for or can afford. Something we say to clients is you wouldn't buy a property in the UK without knowing the final price. Why do this when buying a property in France? It's vital you manage your currency exposure, remove your currency risk, and protect your budget. We're asked a lot about, when should people engage with us? If you are in early stages of looking at buying a property in France, perhaps information gathering, or if you are further down the process, so viewing, making offers, sending deposits, we highly recommend putting some time aside to have a conversation with us. There are different options available to you to allow you to mitigate your currency exposure, your currency risk. Speaking to a currency expert will allow you to learn more about your options, how they work, and give you the confidence to make an informed decision. We've helped thousands of clients buy property in France over a 20-year period. We're experts in this field.
And I've got another question for you, David, as well. I think particularly when you're looking at currency and you're looking to buy that property here in France, when you've committed to buying the property, there is that sort of 3-month lag between, yes, I'm having it, to actually picking up the keys. A lot can happen in the currency market. And I think some people don't know that they can actually forward plan on their currency. What are your views? Tell us a bit more.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the biggest benefits, if not, the main value that we bring is giving clients the ability to fix exchange rates to remove their currency risk. So like I said earlier, we've dealt with thousands of people buying property in France and helping them with the currency element of that. The majority of people think that the thing to do is send the deposit over to the notaire, easy, and then once they get to the act completion in 3 or 4 months' time, again, do the same thing. Go to their bank and send over 200,000 euros and just take whatever the exchange rate is. But that's definitely not the case. There are a lot of options. So as a currency specialist, we can help clients fix exchange rates. It's a product called a forward contract. The majority of buyers, people buying in France, do this once they sign the compromise. So as I said earlier, they've signed the compromise, their 10-day cooling off period is over. They're going to buy that property in a couple of months, 3 months' time. Using a forward contract, at that point, they can fix the exchange rate, lock that exchange rate in. So they know once they get to the act, the completion, they know the rate they're getting and how much it's going to cost them in sterling. So it's pretty much just it's securing the sterling cost of the property way ahead of completion. The worst thing that can happen is you sign the compromise, 10-day cooling off period is over, 3 months' time, sterling euro drops. And then you're in a position where you still have to pay the euro balance for the property, but it's costing you an extra 3, 4, 5% more. Is that money in the budget? Is the property worth that much of sterling? So it's these kind of situations that we can help clients avoid, just removing currency risk, managing their currency exposure.
And David, one final question from me. The US elections coming up in sort of 3 to 4 months' time as well. Where do you actually feel and where do you see currency going in the next 3 months across both the euro, the pound and the dollar?
So sterling euro has definitely been priced in over the last 6 weeks. So we saw it move up to a 2-year high once the UK general election was called by Rishi Sunak. And Macron obviously called a snap election as well. So we've seen the exchange rates definitely priced in way before these elections have even taken place. But there's going to be a lot of volatility over the next couple of months, post-election. So in the UK, how will the central bank, the Bank of England, react to the new government? What's going to happen with interest rates? Interest rates have the biggest impact on currency markets, on the exchange rates. Obviously, with the results in France as well, it's going to have a big impact on the European Union. So there's a lot of uncertainty. I think a lot of people feel sterling euro will continue to rise, especially with the Labour government. It's still uncertain. And I think if you are buying a property in France, there's still an element of risk if you expect exchange rates to move up, because if it doesn't happen, or if they move, in the opposite way, then is your budget kind of getting a little bit tight? So the message we always say to clients is speak to us, find out kind of the levels we're seeing, how a forward contract works, the benefit of this, because as I said earlier, it does allow you to fix the sterling cost of your property. You don't have to worry about exchange rates. You can concentrate on more fun stuff when you're, buying a property in France. You don't have to watch the exchange rates every single day and see the cost of your property moving every single day. So it's a part of the process that is very important and can be managed quite effectively by using someone like Smart Currency.
Thank you so much, David, for joining us today. It's been great to have that insight into the whole world of currency. We're now joined by our third guest, and we are joined by Darren Fletcher from Chase Buchanan Private Wealth Management. I'm really interested here. There are a lot of people living in France who have got investment strategies and investment portfolios. I think it's really important to understand how these 2 elections now will impact that. Darren, thank you for joining us. My question really is to understand a little bit more about, for those living in France, what is the impact on the UK and the French elections on a person's investment strategy going forward?
I think with any governmental change in power, it's important for expats to stay informed about the political climate in both their home country and also in France. By understanding the potential impact of the election result, a client can make a more informed decision regarding their investment strategies, thereby balancing any risk and opportunity that might exist. And seeking advice from experts familiar with cross-border tax advice and international investments is vitally important to ensure that they can receive the correct advice in an ever-changing political landscape. And I think probably a couple of examples here. If we look at historic French election results, they do have significant impacts, for example, on assurance vie, through changes in tax policies, economic reforms, market reactions, regulatory adjustments, and shifts in investment behaviour. The attractiveness and performance of an insurance fee product, for example, in France as an investment vehicle, have often reflected the broader economic and political landscapes shaped by the new government's policies and priorities. If we counter that from the UK perspective, the impact of a change of a UK government on expat pensions typically is multifaceted and has historically affected pension policies, including the lifetime allowance, for example, pension transfer regulations, exchange rates, social security agreements. And expats should stay informed about potential policy changes and consider seeking advice from financial experts to adapt their retirement planning strategies accordingly. And I guess in summary, changes to governments have historically created further tax burdens on investors, hence the need for clients to stay abreast of any changes and seek that professional advice.
Maybe tell us just a little bit more about Chase Buchanan and what you do.
Yeah, certainly. So Chase Buchanan Private Wealth Management, we specialise in providing cross-border tax advice to expats relocating into Europe. We have a team in France, and they're well equipped to assist clients in achieving their dream move, ensuring that every aspect of their financial plan aligns with their new life in France.
And Darren, just finally, what are the next sort of few days going to be looking like for your clients and your interaction with your clients here in France?
Absolutely. I think with any political change, it's important that we stay close to clients. We have scheduled contact strategies with every client that we have. A change in government, a change in legislation, we will always be on the front foot ready to speak to those clients. So we will absolutely be reaching out to all of our clients over the coming days and weeks with regard to both the elections in France and also in the UK and how that might affect their plans.